Hello, I'm Chuck Martin, and welcome to the Voices of the Internet of Things. With me today is Don Berchoff, founder and CEO of TruWeather Solutions. Don has been a director of the National Weather Service of his Science and Technology at NOAA, Vice President Advanced Weather Programs at Unisys, and Chief Technology Officer and Vice President of Tempoquest. At TruWeather, Don is focused on aiding the flying vehicle industry in the entire ecosystem by providing micro-weather decision insights. Welcome here, Don. Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you again, Chuck. I've been watching you online. You're doing great.
Yeah, you've been following this for a very, very long time. I mean, you're really kind of a pioneer of micro weather, if you will. Before it was really catching, before anyone was paying attention to it. Can you kind of walk me through the history of this? Like where did this start? Like from way back when?
It started in probably February of 1969. I was 7 years old, and we had a major snowstorm in New York City. It was called the Lindsay Day snowstorm. That because he almost got fired as mayor because he couldn't get the streets cleared. And we had like 16 inches of snow, and I was only maybe 4 feet tall, whatever you are at 7 years old. And my dad said, "Go out and shovel the path." And I was out there struggling, and when I got the path done, I had an igloo on both sides of my property, and I just started carving it out, and I was like, "Man, this is amazing. I wonder what causes this." And really, honestly, that was the beginning, and it's been a lifelong learning for me. I took diaries and had lots of diaries. I paid attention to weather, and I probably had my Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours before I went to college. And then I got my degree in meteorology, and then went in the Air Force. And the Air Force is really where I honed my understanding of how the environment affects weapon systems, right? And how do you maximize your targeting? How do you maximize your success rates? How do you use your assets properly? How do you get the most out of those assets? And that's what I did for 24 years. And I ended my time running an Air Force base in Central Asia. I ran Manas Air Base, which was the main logistics and staging base in Afghanistan.
What
And
what
I
was
got
the weather
stories about that.
technology like? What was the weather technology like at that time?
Uh, so when I first started in the Air Force in 1984 and 85, I sometimes had to call places and ask the operator to get me a line to, say, Ireland. And I've had conversations with maintenance men in base ops where there was no air traffic in yet, or no weather people, and I had crews going overseas that needed that alternate. And if they didn't get an alternate at a location in the UK, they had to come back. They had to take the whole fighter drag back. And I would call and say, "What does it look like outside?" That
That was
was
the technology.
well. I mean, we had some modeling. It was very crude back then. We didn't have the Appalachian Mountains in the model. We didn't know where the terrain was. We just understood how the physics worked, but we didn't have a lot of data. We didn't have satellites, and you had to basically piece it together. And it was part of my job was to have an imagination about what the atmosphere was looking like and what it was doing. And I was constantly trying to test that and reassess it. So I was always hungry for data to help validate. And that's how I built my heuristics, and that's what it was like. And then, of course, technology got better, and I took advantage of that. I was always a leader in trying to get the best technology into Air Force weather where I could. And I tested some things at some air operations centers about how much weather delays and cancellations were impacting the fleet. And in 1 year, I figured out that a lot of the cancellations and delays, about 60% of them, were not due to weather itself. It was due to miscommunication, uncertainty about what was happening. And I got the TACC, which was the Tank Airlift Control Center, to actually change their procedures. We did a test, and we cut the weather delays for 100,000 missions a year. We had 5,000 a year, just like the sun rising every day. And we got it down by half in 1 year by changing towards a risk management framework where we only suggested they change missions if we were 90% or better certain of the weather was going to occur. And
Well,
that's really where this all started.
so how did that migrate into advanced air mobility? What's the link?
Well, the link is that in the Air Force, I was obviously doing all air stuff. My guys in my operations center, we supported 500,000 missions given weather briefings, and we started getting drones into the fleet. And I started understanding the weather impacts of drones. When you take the pilot off the aircraft, you've lost the best weather sensor you've ever had. And you don't understand how much the pilot's heuristics, learning themselves about the weather through 4,000 flight hours, really prepares them for hitting undetectable or unknowable phenomena that occur every day. And so when I saw this problem coming, and because of my time in the weather service, where I was really in charge of finding the best science and technology and getting it into operations, I began to realize there was a lot of stuff on the shelf that was not making it through. Our current aviation weather system, the last time we updated really real data collection, I'm talking about real data collection now, I'm not talking about models, I'm talking about real data collection in the low altitude, was in the 1992 when we deployed the Doppler weather radar. We really have an appreciably increased collection of weather data below 5,000 feet. And that's the zone that's really the problem, because satellites cannot penetrate all the way down to the surface. Some can, and we do have some of that, but we are a data void below 5,000 feet. The only place we collect data is at an airport, and that's usually just ceiling and visibility, and we might get some wind data from planes landing at the airport. But below 5,000 feet, the FAA has acknowledged only 3% of the country has weather measurements for low altitude, and that's been manifested through their NPRMS. They've documented that, and the new national AAM strategy. So I knew this was coming, and I got really interested in trying to solve this problem or address it in like around 2018.
That was a long time ago in this market.
Well, you have to, I knew that based on my experience, I knew it was going to take a while to even produce the capabilities and the technology and bring it together to actually be able to address the problem. And that's why I got ahead of it, because I knew that once people figured out it was going to be a problem. And by the way, they're just starting to figure it out now in 2025. I knew it would be too late to be able to meet the first round of flights in urban air mobility. It would take another 5 or 10 years for them to catch up. And sure enough, even today, the research that they want to conduct that's in the national strategy has actually been done already, which is good. See, the folks in the bureaucracy, sometimes they don't really know what's happening out there. And I work with them and I love them. And the FAA has done a great job of adopting these concepts, and they've gotten them in. So this is all good news. It's a good news story, right? But you had to get this started years ago, and when nobody understood yet what the magnitude of the problem was. And so we're sitting there now, 80% there.
So what is the issue with weather? I mean, commercial jets have been flying without this information for decades. What is the difference in weather that matters right now?
Well, there's three or four things. Number one is, remember I talked about it earlier. With drones, you're taking the pilot off the aircraft. So you're losing the best weather sense you ever had. We've always had unknowable or undetectable weather, always in the boundary, in the low altitude. If you talk to helicopter pilots, they'll tell you they've had to sometimes not take missions just because they didn't know what was happening at the hospital they had to land at, because there was no weather measurements, no equipment. And local climates, microclimates, are out there that affect, air flight. And so what we've traditionally done is just been more conservative and said, we won't do it, right? Won't fly. The second is that most of these aircraft have been flying mostly above the weather, right? In a high altitude. Third is that we have better weather data at 30,000 feet than we do below 5,000 feet because of the satellites. Fourth is every place they landed were generally well instrumented. And five is the aircraft were gasoline engine. You could put more gas on. You could take, if you had a wind problem, and they weren't electric powered, which is a conserved energy system. So these are all the factors that are really requiring a transformational look at how aviation weather operates below 5,000 feet, because this industry requires new data, a new mindset, and a whole new concept of operations about weather information, strategy, workflow, and data integration into these decision systems.
So right now, electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles are, in the U.S. anyway, primarily going to be piloted. Does that
Right.
does that help in terms of the weather mitigation? And then where do drones fit in this whole thing? Because drones, we're going beyond line of sight, obviously.
Well, having the pilot definitely, obviously helps, right? but you still have the constraints that the new system is posing. One is that they're battery operated, so you have less power, and to get to alternates, you have to have more power reserve, and you don't have a lot of power to reserve. Two is that the aircraft, they really need to hit sweet airspace for wind when they land at a vertiport. And so the winds at altitude, when they're starting to do their angle of attack, where they start that angle of attack is based on what you think the winds are doing. And what we're finding today is winds could be off 100% in direction and speed at 300 feet compared to what the models are saying at times. It doesn't mean it's all the time, but the problem is when you have that uncertainty, you always have to carry the extra power reserve, always. And when you do that, you're dropping weight on the floor. You're dropping distance on the floor. You're doing something. It's all a conserved system, and it costs money. So all this uncertainty costs money. 30% of manned aviation today that's canceled or delayed due to weather could have flown. It was the uncertainty. You're paying for that, Chuck, in your airline ticket. I imagine there's a weather tax in your airline ticket that you're paying for that uncertainty. Because, when airlines have to, delay or cancel mission flights, or you get rerouted, that costs them money, right? So you're paying for that. They're not paying for that. And what I saw coming is that with these air taxis, they're going to have the same problem even with a pilot, except it's going to be on steroids. Because if you don't know what's going to happen 3 hours in advance, you cannot take a family of 4 going to Disney World to the vertiport to tell them, oh, you're going to miss your flight at Newark because here downtown vertiport, the winds blowing around this urban canyon today are stronger than we expected. And you're not going to make it to the airport. So the bottom line is you have to have a short range, and this is what the national strategy talks about. It says, we need better weather detection. We need better short nowcasting and short range prediction systems. And that's, basically that's what we've been saying for 7 years. And we're positioned now to support these EIPPs and some of these advanced technologies to get them flying and have the economics work in their favor. Because the economics is what I care about. I want to get them flying in 100% of those windows. I don't want to leave people on the vertiport upset that they missed their flight. I don't want customers to fly through turbulence we can avoid because we know where that turbulence is around buildings. But we have to measure it because systems don't exist today to know that in real time.
So the Advanced Air Mobility National Strategy, which is really kind of the blueprint for 2026, is that the first time that's been officially recognized? Because weather is in it, obviously. I mean, blatantly obvious. Right. Is that the first major time that it's been mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, weather, I've been working with NASA and the FAA since 2019. I worked with NASA on the urban air mobility ConOps they built back then. And we got I kept pushing to get weather more recognized within that document. And we got it in there in that planning strategy ConOps document, right? But it's really the first time that the FAA has acknowledged that weather is a risk that can't be mitigated in the future for drones by pilots. See, weather's always been considered a hazard that could be mitigated. If you didn't know, assuming that this again goes back to the fact that you don't know what's out there all the time. So there's always a lurking hazard, but they assume that the pilot was going to get out of it. Well, you can't assume that now. The pilot's not going to be on the aircraft. The heuristics are not going to be there anymore. And when it comes to air taxis, the recognition is that buildings and urban canyons cause these wind changes that, again, it's more of a risk than it is a hazard because you may not be able to mitigate it if you don't know it's there. It may be too late. So we got to get anticipatory about it. And this is the first time that they've actually said, hey, there's a scientific argument to say, yeah, this is a problem. We know we don't have enough weather measurements in the boundary layer, and we got to close those in areas where we're going to have high density operations.
So some of the air taxis that have been flying with test pilots, they've flown thousands and thousands of hours already. Have they found this out? Do you have any sense of that?
So the one thing I want to make sure I make clear is you could fly air taxis with the current weather systems we have. You can. You just won't fly efficiently, and you won't make, you're going to hurt your business model because, and so, yeah, when you do test flights, yeah, you pick the days you fly, you make sure they're 100%, you're very certain the weather's good, and then you fly. But you can't operate an airline like that.
But what do they do? What's the solution?
Well, the solution is you have to reduce the uncertainty in the microclimate so you know what's out there. And once we could do that with better instrumentation, ground-based infrastructure that we've tested. TruWeather has been funded by NASA. We have 2 test beds, one in Fort Worth, which I think is the best low-altitude weather test bed in the world for operational requirements. And one's going to be out in Hollister, California, where Whisk is flying, and it's going to cover that whole valley area. And what you have to do is you got to show that by collecting these wind data at a much higher resolution, and you capture the ceiling and visibility in areas that you can't see today because the models can't pick it up because it's a water effect or it's a terrain effect or it's just in a valley where the fog sits in longer. You get that captured, and then we take that data and we really run some real machine learning on real data, not on analysis. That's what most of weather machine learning is today. It's all about an analysis of what we think happened. And some of that's at a resolution of 15 kilometers. So therefore, you're not even seeing in the historical data set, you're not seeing the local microclimates because they're sub-grid. That's what people are using for machine learning. It's not going to work. You need to get real data, and then you get that into these machine learning weather models, and you could start predicting and seeing these areas and making those available for flight planning in these systems.
In the Fort Worth test, I saw a helicopter drop some big machine on top of a building.
Yeah.
What is that all about? And how did the Fort Worth test come about? What is it?
So that was a wind scanning LiDAR that we put on top of the terminal at Alliance Airport. And I want to thank Chris Ash and their team out at Alliance and also Hillwood for being such a great champion of TruWeather. I also want to thank Ernest Huffman and the North Texas Council of Governors and the city of Fort Worth. We're building out that test bed with these advanced weather sensors that aren't used today in aviation weather.
Why Fort Worth?
We did our first test bed in Hampton to learn. We brought out these unique instruments. We learned a lot about how hard it is to deploy them and how important location is and how, and so once we got through that was a small business innovation research grant by NASA. Once we learned that, we said we want to do phase 2 somewhere else. And we want to do it where we think there's the best chance that there's going to be the early adopters of AAM and drones. And I had to make that decision 3 years ago. And I have to say I nailed it, right? So we went out, worked with the North Texas Council of Governors, we worked with the community, and we got that test bed deployed. And there's going to be 3 scanning wind LiDARs that we could scan 10-kilometer radius of an area and see the winds in near real time.
LiDAR can see the wind?
Yeah, LiDAR so what LiDAR does is it has a beam, a laser that looks up and can see dirt and dust in the atmosphere and aerosols, and then it could track those particles, and using Doppler, we can get the wind speed. So yes, that's what we're going to be using as one of our ground-based sensors to close these gaps. Because today we do not collect wind data below 5,000 feet, except for 2 balloon launches a day. All right, at 180 places. The rest of the country, it's just we use models. We take that little bit of data we have, and we try to estimate what's going to happen and what is happening. This is going to close that gap, and then we're going to use mobile. Also, we want to get sensors and data collection off of the AM vehicles themselves, which the strategy calls for. And then we want to be able to crowdsource that and really build this very rich data set in areas where there's high density operations. And that's what Fort Worth's all about. NASA's supporting that with the SBIR. And we also have a SMART grant from DOT, stage 1. And that's also been funding this. And so this is how we've come together to pick Dallas. Now we also have, TruWeather has low altitude weather instruments in Detroit, in Ohio, in North Dakota, in parts of North Carolina, and Mojave. And these are companies that invested in these because they see what I'm doing and what we're doing and said, we want to have that better weather quality. So in Detroit, we have a wind LiDAR right downtown and supporting Michigan Central. We have a weather instrumented drone at Grand Forks up in Grand Sky with Tom Sawyer, who's also been a great advocate for us and a leader in helping us. And we have others out there that are starting to adopt this. And my plan is to have a public-private partnership approach to get this infrastructure out in areas where there'll be enough revenue generation through our services to support it. And then no one OEM, no one operator has to pay for the infrastructure. It's a matter of crowdsourcing, getting that data out to everyone, and then everyone pays their share. And then you have this really good, high quality data to really nail your flight times and get better at flying, further, carry more weight, reduce your need for reserve. Today they're carrying 50% reserve. They only need to carry 20. But they have to carry 50 because you don't know on those days when those winds are just not what you expected.
So presuming Fort Worth is a great success, what happens after that?
Well, Fort Worth, I'm hoping our next stage is to get a stage 2 SMART grant out of DOT, and we're going to build out of Fort Worth. We're going to build the quintessential smart city, low altitude ground transportation weather ecosystem, and then be able to take that and replicate it in any urban area anywhere in the world. And the EIPPs that are out now, are you familiar with the eVTOL implementation pilot projects that their FAA has put out an RFP for? And TruWeather is going to be on hopefully several of those if ours win, the ones that we're on. And there are some major cities in there that we would bring this technology into the EIPP to accelerate learning.
What is EIPP?
It's the implementation pilot project. So the FAA put out an RFP in September, and what they wanted, it was to be able to test and demonstrate eVTOL operations, ecosystem, and actual aircraft flying in an area. So there's regional consortiums that are coming together to put in a proposal that it's due on the 22nd of January. And what that'll do is they'll pick at least 5 locations that they believe are best prepared to advance towards commercialization of air taxi. And it's also around cargo drone, regional cargo drone, and also using medical logistics and drones for medical logistics. And of course, air taxis to move people. And they're going to pick the locations that they think have the best ecosystem, the best partners, the best support by the community, and the best business case and existing infrastructure to demonstrate flying these missions and commercializing them within 3 years. And so that's what the EIPP is. And my plan is to bring what we've done in Fort Worth into these IPPs as the next step, and then work with the operators to understand how, what they see, help them use the data in the best way possible within their systems, because that's what I'm an expert at from the military, and then find out from them what their real pain points are and how do we tune all this so that they're willing to pay extra for it, because we can get them a 4 or 5 to 1 return on investment.
Oh, is this more significant in terms of this new ecosystem? Essentially, is it more significant for drones or for air taxi type vehicles, or does it matter?
I would say from a risk perspective, it's more significant for drones, and it's more significant because when you have certainty, you can fly further without a pilot and feel, you don't have to be as conservative in your decision making, so you can make more money. It's all about making money. For the air taxis, it's more about the economics. It's more about the reliability of the service and taking care of your customers. And I think that's going to be huge, because if your customers have a bad experience out of the box, you're going to lose them. Because this is not, a lot of people haven't flown on helicopters, right? And there's a big difference in flying on a larger aircraft and then flying on a helicopter. I mean, I've flown on helicopters in Afghanistan, and I'm always a little higher pucker factor, right? And so the bottom line is that we've got to make sure the client experience is 100% pleasurable. And it's hard to do that if you have all this weather uncertainty, because if you have to cancel in the last minute because the winds around a building have, the winds at the airport can shift 30 degrees and you don't have an issue. The winds shift at the airport 30 degrees, they might shift 180 degrees, and the winds may pick up around a vertiport because of the funneling of the winds. If you don't have that well understood, it's chaos, because you're really it's like you're shooting in the dark, and you're going to have a lot of cancellations, a lot of disruption, and even some of the ride comfort. And I think you want to get ahead of that, and because you don't want that to become an objection to this industry. And that's what so I think it's important from an economics perspective. And there's a risk factor, but I'm not worried about them crashing. I'm just worried about the economics and the client and the reliability of the service.
What does this look like around the U.S.? Because different markets are different. I mean, Florida, California, Texas have different climates than, say, Boston and Maine and the Northeast, and snow and freezing. What does
You
that look
nailed
like?
it. You nailed it. So what we're doing, TruWeather, is we're saying first, you can't have, just like the aviation systems moving to a data performance standard, we have to do the same with the weather and infrastructure at vertiports or anywhere. It's not the same size fits all. Today it is. It's either a windsock or $500,000 ASOS. That's not a choice, right? And ASOS, by the way, doesn't measure winds aloft. So what we have another grant with NASA. And we're looking at a vertiport, looking at how you can develop a framework to understand what a vertiport weather system should look like based on climate, based on proximity to buildings, based on all these things. You don't have to have the same equipment everywhere. You just have to have the right equipment for that environment. So that's number one, and we're leading that. TruWeather's leading that, just like we led the new weather standard. We were the ones that got the ASTM weather standard for part 108, 107, and now it's going to be hopefully 135. We led that and published that with a group of 60 industry partners in 2024 in January, and that's driving us to allow us to use this unique novel data, and it's going to be tied to the Part 146 that the FAA is implementing. And weather is now considered an automated data service provider at the same level as detect and avoid because of these challenges. So what we're going to do is
Part 146.
Part 146 is it's a rule that's going to come out that's going to support 108 and 135 operations for automated data service providers, and how you're going to certify them under a performance standard and under a risk-based performance standard. And so third-party weather, third-party surveillance, third-party detect and avoid, this is a whole new concept, right? I mean, in the past, the government controlled that. But now everybody recognizes you need to have public and private partnership to solve this problem fast enough and to make it affordable. So that's going to open this up for third-party service providers to how you're going to certify them to know the software is good, to know you're safe.
In this arena, are there other Don Berchoffs, or are you it?
Well, there's other weather companies, and I want to give my team a lot of credit. Fortunately, it's more than me now. I have a very strong team of folks that understand this problem now, and we're all working together. I've been able to back off a little bit. But no, there's really nobody who understands the complexity of the problem in weather, because you can't just put one sensor here and solve the problem and one sensor there. It really is about understanding the ConOps, understanding where the current weather systems are and what they can do, understanding how then you've got to fill those gaps with these novel weather sensors that'll be approved under Part 146, hopefully. And then not only getting the sensors deployed, and also the mobile piece of this, you got to aggregate that data and make it into a system of systems. It has to be a network. And then you got to bring that in, and you got to run modeling on it and get that out in a way that's going to be used for airspace management in this new system. That's a very complex weather problem as well as an operational problem. So we're doing the whole ecosystem. We started this 7 years ago. We are bringing on weather companies that are, we don't try to solve the whole problem ourselves. We're looking for the best of the best technology. I want to think of our system as an open system for anyone to plug in their weather and make money through the system. But you need to have that Uber aggregator to solve this problem. The government used to be the Uber aggregator of weather. And we only, the last time we updated the weather system for real weather was 1992. So this is the only way I could see to accelerate and get this advanced technology out. And all I'm doing is running on the same backbone as all the other detect and avoid, UTM, PSU concepts, right? I'm just saying, look, we got to do the same thing for weather that you're doing for these airspace navigation, low altitude services. And then the key is to then be able to get the data from third-party weather back to the government systems through SWIM. But the weather systems that third-party use have to be certified and approved. And that's what Part 146 is about, trusted data. So now you can get it back into the FAA system, and now you can finally get better weather data even in there for helicopter pilots that have nothing to do with maybe this new technology.
By the end of 2026, end of 2027, what does this ecosystem look like? Is it pretty in good shape by then?
My goal is by 2028, you'll have several early adopters of eVTOL that will have a weather ecosystem, hopefully as rigorous and as good as I'm projecting. It's all going to come down to budgets, right? The good news is the places I'm working with have some budget for weather. I'm working in places that realize this is important. Not everyone sees it the same way, and it's all based on education. Some people think, oh, I look at the Weather Channel, I get my weather. That's the best I could do. That's very naive. Some people think I can look at my app and get the weather, but they're not. As I told you earlier, there's no new data getting in that app. It's the same stuff. It's just moving the shell game around. So we got a lot of work to do to educate, which is what you're going to help me do. And then the key is that we get out to these early adopters through these EIPPs, and we can have, some of these early cities like, New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Houston, Dallas, Atlanta, Miami, Orlando, which are kind of the ones everybody's been talking about by 2028. I can bring this capability to each of those locations, and they will have, from day one, a weather system that they wouldn't have had until 2035 or 2038. And that's going to help this ecosystem be economically more feasible earlier, and it's going to help with that client reliability out of the box. Hopefully you won't get those bad weather stories that you will get if you don't have the right infrastructure.
Well, I look forward to watching this market and to watching the Don pioneering efforts. Thank you, Don. Thank you all for listening to the Voices of the Internet of Things. I'm Chuck Martin.